I had forgotten how heavy silence could be until I stepped onto the gravel drive of my father's mansion, the stones crunching under my boots in a rhythm that felt too loud against the still air. The house rose ahead of me like a cathedral to grief, a structure of stone and shadow that had not aged so much as it had brooded, waiting, watching. I had not seen it in more than a decade, not since the day I swore I would never return, but grief does strange things, and when the lawyer's letter arrived, its words pulling me back with the weight of duty and inheritance, I came, not because I wanted to, but because something inside me knew the story wasn't finished, because some doors never stay closed, even when you bolt them with years of silence. The mansion's windows stared down like the eyes of a predator, glinting faintly in the waning daylight, each pane reflecting the sky's bruised purple, each one too dark to see inside. I paused, gripping the handle of my suitcase tighter, telling myself that I was only here to sign papers, to collect what was left, to sell this rotting tomb and bury it once more under strangers' hands. Yet beneath that lie was the truth I didn't want to name. I had questions that had gnawed at me since childhood, questions about my father's sudden rages, about my mother's disappearance, about the locked doors and hushed conversations that slipped under my door like smoke. Now he was gone, and only the house remained, a vault that might finally give me answers, though I feared what they might cost. The front doors were taller than I remembered, carved with vines and flowers that time had warped into grotesque shapes, petals curling like claws, vines twisting like serpents. My hand trembled as I pushed against them, and the sound they made was like a groan pulled from the throat of something long asleep, a sound that seemed to reverberate not just in the hall but in my chest. The air inside was stale and heavy, thick with dust and something metallic beneath, like rust or dried blood left to cling to wood and stone for too many years. I coughed, my voice lost instantly in the vast emptiness of the hall, my presence swallowed by walls that seemed to lean inward as if listening. The grand staircase coiled upward into shadow, its banister draped in cobwebs that shivered at the faintest draft. Portraits lined the walls, my ancestors staring down with eyes painted too vividly, their gazes sharp enough to cut, their smiles too strained, as though the artist had caught them mid-confession. I did not know their names, yet in their features I saw echoes of my own face, cheekbones, dark hair, a sharpness to the jaw that made me feel less like I was looking at strangers and more like I was looking at reflections of what I might become if I stayed too long in this place. The lawyer's box was still clutched under my arm, its leather scuffed and corners dented. But inside it carried the weight of inheritance, property deeds, ledgers, a sealed envelope with my father's name scrawled in his furious hand, and on the very top, nestled like a crown jewel, the key. It was not brass or steel, not anything ordinary, it was ivory, pale as bone, polished so smooth it seemed to drink the dim light, its teeth carved with delicate precision, every groove too deliberate to be chance. I lifted it, and the instant it touched my skin, a coldness spread up my arm, not unpleasant but heavy, as though the key itself was alive, as though it recognized me. My first instinct was to drop it, to let it fall back into the box and shut the lid tight, but my fingers clenched instead, refusing, as though the decision was not mine but its. I slipped it into my coat pocket, and the weight grew heavier, dragging the fabric down as if it wanted me to notice it, to never forget it was there. I told myself it was just an heirloom, a curiosity, nothing more, but deep down, in the part of me I never spoke aloud, I knew keys were not made without doors, and doors in this house were never simple. I climbed the staircase, my footsteps muffled by a carpet eaten thin by moths. And each step echoed like a heartbeat too slow, too measured, as though I was ascending into the chest of something alive. The corridors stretched long and narrow, lined with doors I half remembered. The nursery door was still scratched where I had once tried to carve my initials with a pin, the study door still bore the faint scent of pipe smoke, though it had been sealed since his death. But it was the door at the very end, the one always locked, the one my father forbade me to touch, that pulled my gaze. Its handle gleamed faintly, unclouded by dust, as though it had been touched recently, though I knew no one had lived here in months. I reached for it, fingers brushing the cold metal, and in my pocket, the ivory key pulsed warm, faintly alive. My breath caught, it was absurd, impossible, yet undeniable. I pressed the knob, but it would not turn, immovable, sealed by more than time. The key burned against my leg, and for a moment I almost pulled it free, almost slid it into the lock. But dread stopped me, a weight pressing my chest so heavy I staggered back, whispering to myself that I wasn't ready, not yet. That night, I lay in my old bedroom, its furniture shrouded in white cloths like corpses wrapped for burial, the moonlight slicing through cracked shutters. Sleep came reluctantly, shallow, fractured. I woke to creaks that did not belong to the settling of wood, to faint thuds that traveled across the floorboards in patterns like pacing footsteps. My heart pounded, my breath shallow, but when I opened my eyes, the shadows on the walls moved, stretching long fingers across the ceiling, curling around the corners as though testing their reach. I sat up, clutching the blanket like it could protect me, and my hand brushed the key. It hummed, faintly vibrating in my grip, as though alive with a pulse not my own. I rose, bare feet meeting the icy floor, drawn like a moth to flame. The house seemed to guide me, the air shifting, drafts whispering down one hallway instead of another, as though invisible hands were leading me deeper, pulling me towards something I had never been meant to see. The path ended in a wall, or rather, what had once been a wall. The plaster cracked and crumbled beneath my fingers, revealing brickwork uneven, hasty, like someone had tried to bury a passage quickly, desperately. The key blazed hot in my palm, demanding, and without thinking, I clawed at the bricks, pieces falling to the floor, dust rising in choking clouds until at last the outline of a door revealed itself, old wood blackened with age, veins of rot spreading across its frame. My breath shook as I pressed the ivory key to the lock, and though it had no visible slot, the teeth slid in perfectly, impossibly, like they had been carved for this exact door, this exact moment. The turn was smooth, too smooth, the click too final, and with it the silence of the mansion shattered. A groan echoed from the depths of the wood, a sound not of opening but of awakening, as if the house itself had just drawn its first breath in years. The door groaned inward, its hinges shrieking like an animal in pain, and beyond it lay a room untouched by time. The air was stale, thick with dust that danced in the beam of my flashlight like unsettled spirits, each mote catching the light like an accusing eye. I hesitated on the threshold, one hand gripping the frame to steady myself, the other clenched around the key that now throbbed faintly warm as though it approved, as though it had been waiting for me to bring it home. The room was small, narrower than I expected, its walls lined with shelves sagging under the weight of boxes and objects covered in cloths. At first glance, it looked like storage, a forgotten corner where unwanted things were hidden, but as I stepped deeper, my pulse quickened. These were not forgotten things, they were familiar. I reached for the first cloth, pulling it free, and beneath it was a child's toy, a wooden horse, its paint chipped but the carved letters on its base still clear, S.W. My initials, burned into the wood by a hand I remembered faintly, a gentler hand than my father's, a hand that once stroked my hair while whispering stories at night. My mother's hand? I staggered back, heart pounding, breath caught in my throat. I pulled at another cloth, a shawl, soft but frayed at the edges, the color faded but unmistakable, the same shawl my mother used to wrap around her shoulders on cold nights, the faintest trace of her perfume still clinging to it, though it had been years since she vanished. The room spun, memory crashing into me like a storm, and suddenly I was small again, clutching her skirts, hearing her voice as she sang under her breath to drown out the sound of my father's shouting. I tore at more coverings, frantic now, desperate, each object a knife twisting deeper. A photograph, yellowed but clear, of my mother holding me in her lap, her smile tired but soft. A hairbrush with strands of her dark hair still caught between its bristles. A pair of shoes, carefully placed side by side, as though waiting for her return. The lies unraveled faster than I could catch them. She hadn't left us, hadn't abandoned me. She had been here, in this room, in this house, and every word my father spoke of her disappearance had been nothing but smoke. Tears blurred my vision as I stumbled toward the desk at the far wall, its surface buried under dust thick as ash. I wiped it clean with trembling hands, and my breath froze when I saw the scratches carved into the wood, faint but undeniable. Words, letters clawed into the grain by desperate fingers, "Help me." The room tilted, my knees buckling, the strength gone from my body as I collapsed into the chair, clutching the shawl against me like it could bring her back. The words stared up at me, each line cut deep, each letter a scream preserved in wood, and I could almost see her, trapped, alone, carving her plea into the desk as time swallowed her voice. The key fell from my hand, striking the floor with a hollow chime that echoed too long, the sound reverberating through the walls, through the bones of the mansion, like a bell tolling not for the dead but for the living who had been forgotten. And then the whispers began. At first faint, like the sigh of wind through cracks, but growing, layering, voices overlapping, too many, too urgent. They rose around me, through me, words I could not understand but tones I recognized, pleading, warning, accusing. My breath hitched, my hands covering my ears, but it did nothing. The voices were not in the air, they were inside the walls, inside the floor, inside me. The light of my flashlight flickered, shadows twitching like living things, stretching long arms across the shelves, reaching, beckoning. I stumbled back, knocking over a box, its contents spilling across the floor, letters tied with black ribbon, each envelope stained, the ink blurred as though by tears or worse. I picked one up, my fingers trembling, and though the words were smeared, one line was clear enough to burn itself into me: "He will not let me go." My stomach twisted, bile rising in my throat, and suddenly the walls felt closer, pressing in, the air too thin, too sharp. I grabbed the key, its surface hot now, searing my palm, but I couldn't let go, couldn't drop it. Because even through the pain I felt its pull, its demand: open more, see more, remember everything. I staggered out of the room, slamming the door behind me, my breath tearing from my lungs in ragged gasps. But the sound didn't stop, the whispers followed, seeping through the cracks, through the very wood, chasing me down the corridor like a tide of ghosts rising after years of silence. I fled to my bedroom, shutting the door, leaning against it as though my weight could keep the voices out, but they bled through, faint, insistent. The key burned against my skin, alive, awake, and I realized the truth that had been waiting for me since the moment I stepped into this house. The mansion was not empty, it had never been empty. It had been waiting, holding, remembering, and now that I was here, it wanted to show me everything. I sat on the edge of the bed, the shawl still clutched in my lap, my reflection in the cracked mirror across the room pale and hollow-eyed, and whispered the question that had haunted me since I was a child, the question that now clawed its way from my throat like a confession. What did you do to her, Father? The silence that followed was not silence at all. It was laughter, faint and cold, curling through the walls like smoke, and the house shivered in response. And in that moment, I knew. The key had not been left to me as an heirloom. It had been left as a challenge, a curse, a command. To open, to uncover, to remember, no matter what it destroyed in the process. Morning came reluctantly, though inside the mansion it was hard to tell. The shutters groaned against pale light, the halls still drowning in shadow, the air unchanged, stale as though time itself had stopped moving within these walls. I hadn't slept, not truly, my dreams interrupted by whispers that bled through the floorboards, by the image of my mother's shawl folded neatly on that chair, by the words carved into the desk like a wound that never closed. Help me. The plea followed me into waking, echoing in my skull, refusing to release me. I should have left then. I should have taken my suitcase and fled down the gravel path, abandoned the mansion and its ghosts to rot alone. But the key wouldn't let me. It pressed against my thigh, heavier with every breath, demanding, pulling, a weight not just of ivory but of obligation. Something inside me had shifted the moment I opened that first room. The house was no longer just brick and wood, it was a puzzle, and I was the piece it had been missing. I wandered the halls as the light dimmed, my fingertips trailing across walls cold and damp, the silence interrupted only by the faint rustle of fabric as cobwebs clung to my sleeves. The portraits glared at me with fresh hostility, their painted eyes alive now, their mouths twisted in sneers, though the brushstrokes had never changed. I avoided their stares, focusing instead on the doors, each one a possibility, each one a secret. The second chamber I found was hidden behind a false bookshelf in the library, its wood warped with age, the scent of mildew so strong it clawed at my throat. The key vibrated in my palm, eager, insistent, and when I slid it into the concealed lock, the click was sharper this time, hungrier. The door creaked open to reveal shelves, not of books, but of boxes, file after file, stacked in neat, obsessive order, each labeled with a name. I pulled one down at random, dust billowing in a choking cloud, and opened it. Inside were photographs, men, women, children, each picture paired with handwritten notes, dates, locations, descriptions of last sightings. My stomach clenched as I recognized one face, a girl from town who had vanished when I was a child, her disappearance whispered about for months until silence replaced the search. Her picture was here, in my family's house, filed away like a specimen. I opened another box, then another. Dozens, then hundreds, all filled with names of the missing, lives stolen, tucked neatly into the dark like trophies. My hands shook as I backed away, bile rising in my throat. This was no simple cruelty, this was a record, an archive of horrors my family had carried for generations. The whispers rose, overlapping, some mournful, others furious, their tones clawing at my sanity until I shoved the files back into their shelves, slamming the lids of boxes shut as if I could silence the dead by denying their names. But the voices followed me out, curling through the air, reminding me that I had opened the door, and there was no closing it again. The third chamber waited behind the study, a room my father had forbidden me to enter even as a child, his rage is explosive if I so much as touched the knob. Now the door gave way with the key's command, and the smell that hit me was worse than mildew, worse than dust. It was coppery, thick, unmistakable, blood. The room was small, windowless, its floor stained dark in patches, its walls etched with symbols I did not recognize, circles and lines. Jagged marks that seemed to shift when I stared too long, as though the walls themselves breathed. Tables lined the space, their surfaces scarred with cuts, their edges crusted with dried residue that made my stomach churn. I stumbled forward, light trembling in my hand, and saw chains bolted to the floor, shackles rusted but strong, their iron bitten into the wood where they had been pulled, strained. I touched one without meaning to, and the metal burned cold, colder than ice, colder than death itself, and the voices screamed in unison, 1,000 cries layered into one unbearable wail. I dropped the light, fell to my knees clutching my ears, but still I saw them, shadows flickering in the corners, outlines of figures bound to the chains, heads bowed, their mouths opening in silent screams that rattled the inside of my skull. I squeezed my eyes shut, gasping, whispering to myself that it wasn't real, that it couldn't be real, but the marks on the walls glowed faintly, pulsing, alive, and when I staggered back to the door, I swore I felt something brush against my arm, something that wasn't there when I opened my eyes. I slammed the door shut and ran, the whispers chasing me, my breath ragged, my heart thundering in my chest as though trying to break free. I reached the hall and leaned against the wall, trembling, and when I looked down at the key, it was no longer pale ivory. Its surface was stained, faintly pink, as if it had drunk the room's blood and kept a piece of it. I wanted to throw it away, hurl it into the fire, but when I tried, my fingers wouldn't unclench, locked around it by some force beyond me. The key had claimed me, bound me, and every chamber I opened only deepened its hold. Night fell heavy, though the mansion seemed darker still, its shadows thicker, its halls longer, stretching impossibly far. I lit candles, their flames shivering though there was no wind, and in their glow the walls seemed to sweat, damp patches spreading like wounds. The fourth chamber revealed itself in the cellar, behind a stone slab too heavy for me to move, yet when the key touched it, the slab slid aside as though weight meant nothing. Inside, I found a room colder than the grave, frost clinging to the walls, breath clouding the air though no winter touched the world outside. In the center stood a table draped in black cloth, and atop it lay photographs, hundreds of them pinned together in overlapping webs, each image showing my father standing beside powerful men and women, their faces familiar from newspapers and history books, their eyes blank, their expressions strained. At first I thought them business partners, allies, until I noticed the background of each photograph. Always the same, the mansion's halls, its rooms, its doors. These people had been here, had walked these corridors, had stood where I now stood, their wealth and power intertwined with the rot of this house. My family had not been alone in its darkness. It had been part of something larger, something that stretched beyond these walls, into the world outside, into places I could not yet see. I tore the photographs down, ripping them from the table, but beneath them was another, one that froze my blood cold. It was my mother, her eyes hollow, her smile forced, my father's hand on her shoulder like a brand. And in the corner of the photograph was me, a child no older than 6, standing small and pale, staring directly into the camera. The candle guttered, shadows swallowing the room, and I dropped the photograph, stumbling backward, whispering no, no, no. But the word meant nothing here, not against truth carved so deep into the walls. The voices rose again, louder now, sharper, their tones no longer mournful but furious, demanding. They drove me from the cellar, up the stairs, back into the hall where the portraits watched with fresh hunger, their painted eyes gleaming as though alive. I pressed my back to the wall, clutching the key, the photographs, the shawl, my mind unraveling, and that was when I saw it. At the far end of the corridor, beyond the dust and shadow, stood a door I had never noticed before. Its surface was smooth, its wood pale, untouched by age or rot, glowing faintly as if lit from within. I staggered closer, heart pounding, and when the light of my candle fell across it, I froze. Carved into its surface was a name. My name? Selene Ward. My name carved into the wood should have been impossible. The door was older than me, older than my birth, yet the letters were sharp, fresh, as though etched only moments ago. My hand trembled as I reached for it, fingertips grazing the grooves of my own identity branded into the house itself. The key burned hot in my pocket, its presence overwhelming, urging me forward, promising answers I wasn't ready to face. The whispers fell silent as I touched the lock. For the first time since I'd entered the mansion, the voices hushed completely, leaving a silence so complete it roared in my ears. My breath sounded too loud, my pulse a drumbeat, and in that stillness I felt eyes, not painted eyes, not shadows, but something vast, something awake, watching from the other side of the door. I slid the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, too smoothly, as though the mechanism had been waiting only for me. The door swung open with a sigh, and the air that spilled out was neither cold nor warm, it was empty, void of scent, void of sound, void of life itself. Inside, the chamber was bare, its walls smooth stone, its floor unmarked, except for a single object resting in the center. A chair. An ordinary wooden chair, old, unremarkable, but draped across it was the shawl again, the same shawl I had found folded in the first chamber. My mother's shawl? My throat closed as I stepped inside, the candle's flame shrinking, fighting to survive. The whispers remained silent, as if holding their breath, waiting. I reached out and touched the fabric, the same coarse wool, the same faint scent of lavender, and the moment my fingers closed around it, the door slammed shut behind me. Darkness swallowed the chamber. The candle extinguished, snuffed out by a force I couldn't see, and I was left in pitch black. I spun, heart hammering, fumbling for the door, but my hands met only smooth, seamless wall. The door was gone. Then came the voice. Not a whisper, not a chorus, but a single voice, low and hollow, curling out of the darkness. It spoke my name, not with curiosity, but with ownership. Selene. I froze, my breath locked in my chest, the shawl clenched in my fist like a talisman. The voice grew clearer, stronger, vibrating through the walls, through the floor, through my very bones. You are not the first. You will not be the last. The house chose you, as it chose them. Blood calls to blood. I shook my head, whispering no, no, this isn't real, but the darkness shifted, moving, alive, and I realized I wasn't alone. Shapes emerged, figures seated in a circle around the chair, their outlines faint but undeniable. Men, women, some old, some young, all familiar in ways I couldn't name until recognition struck like lightning. They were my family, generations of wards, their faces twisted, eyes hollow, mouths curved and smiles too wide, too sharp. My father sat among them, his gaze piercing, his hand resting on the arm of his chair as though this gathering was nothing new. Beside him, my mother, but her eyes were blank, her expression vacant, her shawl missing, because it was in my hands now. You were born to this, my father's voice echoed, though his lips never moved. The key was never lost. It was waiting for you. We built this house, we filled it, we fed it, and now you will continue. I stumbled backward, pressing against the stone, shaking my head violently. No. I won't. I'm not like you. The circle of figures leaned forward in unison, shadows stretching, faces elongating, their smiles widening into grotesque masks. You already are, they whispered together, their voices merging into one terrible harmony. The shawl burned in my hands, the fabric searing my skin, and I dropped it with a cry, clutching my palms. The moment it touched the floor, the figures vanished, the chamber shuddered, and the key flew from my pocket, landing on the chair with a metallic clang. Silence again? Heavy, suffocating? I staggered toward the chair, reaching for the key, desperate to escape, but the air thickened around me, slowing me, resisting me, as though I were moving through water. Each step was agony, my lungs burning, my vision blurring, and still the key gleamed, untouched, waiting. When I finally grasped it, the chamber split open with a sound like thunder, the walls cracking, the floor shaking, and light poured in, not daylight, but a blinding, white light that consumed everything, erasing shadow, erasing form. I screamed, covering my eyes, but the light seeped through my skin, through my bones, filling me with a heat that was both unbearable and intoxicating. When the light faded, I was standing in the hall again. The chamber was gone, no door, no mark, no trace. The shawl was gone too, vanished as though it had never existed. Only the key remained, heavy in my palm, its surface now veined with crimson threads that pulsed faintly, like veins beneath skin. The mansion had changed. The halls stretched longer, the ceilings higher, the shadows darker. Doors I hadn't seen before lined the walls, dozens of them, each humming faintly, each waiting. The whispers returned, louder than ever, no longer pleading or mournful but commanding, urging me onward, demanding I continue what I had begun. I stumbled forward, the key dragging me toward the next door, my body trembling, my mind splintering, and for the first time I understood. This was not a house? It was a labyrinth, a living entity, fed by blood, sustained by secrets, and I had awakened it fully. And now it wanted me. I collapsed at the threshold of another door, gasping, the whispers clawing at my skull, the portraits leering, the air thick with rot and dust and memory. My reflection stared back at me from a cracked mirror on the wall, but it wasn't my reflection at all. The eyes were too dark, too hollow, too much like theirs. I screamed and shattered the mirror with my fist, blood running down my knuckles, dripping onto the key. And the ivory drank it, the crimson veins glowing brighter, the whispers crescendoing into laughter, triumphant and endless. The mansion had me now. And I realized with horror that I might never leave. The nights inside the mansion no longer felt like nights. They were stretches of blackness where time lost its shape, where the air never shifted, where the shadows never rested. I had stopped counting the hours, stopped looking for dawn, because I wasn't sure dawn existed here anymore. The house was alive, shifting, growing, and I was trapped inside it like an insect in amber. The key lay heavy against my chest, strung on a chain I hadn't placed there. It pulsed faintly, in rhythm with my heartbeat, or perhaps my heart had begun to match its rhythm instead. The veins of crimson across its ivory surface glowed more fiercely now, as though feeding on me, binding me tighter with every drop of blood I had already given. Every corridor led to more doors. Every door led to another chamber. Some filled with records of the dead, some with artifacts stained by violence, some with horrors I couldn't describe because they refused to exist in the human tongue. I tried to resist, to shut my eyes, to refuse the key's call, but resistance was a lie. My hand always moved, my fingers always turned the lock, my body always obeyed even as my mind screamed no. One night, or perhaps it was morning, or neither, I found myself before the grand staircase, the portraits looming higher, their eyes no longer just watching but following, their smiles twitching wider when I passed. At the top of the stairs, a new door waited, larger than any I had seen, its surface carved with countless names, names I recognized from the files, the photographs, the missing. Thousands of them etched into wood that gleamed pale like bone. The key quivered, eager, but when I touched the knob my skin burned as though seared. The whispers didn't plead this time, they roared, thousands of voices shouting in unison, urging me, commanding me, open it now. My body trembled, every part of me resisting, but my hand turned the key anyway, and the door swung inward. The chamber beyond was vast, cathedral-like, its ceiling lost in shadow, its walls lined with shelves that stretched higher than I could see. But these shelves held no books, no boxes, no photographs. They held bones. Skulls, femurs, ribs, spines, stacked and ordered with obsessive precision, each labeled with a small ivory tag. The air was thick with the dust of centuries, the silence broken only by the soft rattle of bones shifting as though disturbed by unseen hands. I staggered down the aisle, my candle sputtering in the cold. My stomach lurched with every tag I read, every name carved into ivory plaques tied to the remains. Some I remembered from childhood stories, some from newspaper clippings, some from whispers of missing neighbors, teachers, strangers. All here, all reduced to bone, catalogued like belongings, like trophies. At the chamber's center stood a pedestal. And upon it rested a book, its cover bound in leather so dark it was almost black, its clasp made of ivory shaped like the key itself. My hand lifted against my will, trembling, fingers brushing the surface. The voices hushed instantly, the silence absolute, suffocating, and I understood that this book was different. This was not a record. This was a command. I unclasped it, my breath shallow, and opened to the first page. The ink shimmered as though wet, the words curling in a script I shouldn't have been able to read, yet I did. It told of the beginning, of a pact forged generations ago when the first stone of this mansion was laid. A pact between my ancestors and something else, something vast and hungry, something that lived beneath the ground and fed on what they offered. Blood, bone, memory. In exchange, the Wards thrived, their power and wealth secured, their line preserved, their influence spreading like a shadow across centuries. And now the pact required me. The next page bore my name, written in ink that glistened like fresh blood, the letters curling across the parchment as though alive. Beneath it, a command: take your place. Continue the offering. Become the keeper. I snapped the book shut, heart pounding, bile rising in my throat. No, I whispered aloud, my voice cracking, shaking. I won't. I won't. The shelves rattled violently, bones clattering like waves crashing, the voices screaming again, furious, deafening, demanding obedience. The floor shook, dust raining from above, the candle extinguished in the blast of sound and air. In the dark, I felt hands, skeletal, icy, grasping at my arms, my legs, my shoulders, pulling me down, dragging me toward the pedestal. I screamed, thrashing, kicking, clawing at the invisible grip, but the book opened itself, its pages flipping, faster, faster, until it stopped on a blank one. My blood dripped onto it from the cuts on my fists, the ink searing into the page, my name rewriting itself over and over in crimson letters. No! I shrieked, tearing free with a strength born of desperation, grabbing the book and hurling it into the shelves. Bones cascaded in an avalanche, crashing to the ground, splintering, shattering, and the chamber roared with fury, the whispers now screams of rage and hunger. The key burned against my chest, scalding, branding, and before I knew what I was doing, I yanked it from the chain and hurled it after the book. The moment it left my hand, the screaming ceased. Silence fell so sudden it rang in my ears. The chamber collapsed inward, the shelves crumbling, the floor splitting, a void yawning open beneath me. I ran, stumbling, tripping, gasping, as the ground cracked and gave way, bones tumbling into darkness, whispers rising faintly from below like the dying breath of a monster starved. I burst through the door and slammed it shut, the wood searing hot beneath my palms. For a moment, I thought it was over. The house shuddered once, then stilled. The portraits returned to stillness, the air cleared, the silence deepened. But when I looked down at my hands, the veins beneath my skin glowed faintly crimson, pulsing in the same rhythm the key once had. And I realized with horror. I hadn't destroyed the pact. I had inherited it. At first, I told myself the glow was a trick of exhaustion, a hallucination after nights without sleep, a mark left by fear and candlelight. But as I staggered through the mansion, the glow followed me. Every mirror reflected it, every shadow pulsed with it, every portrait seemed to sneer wider when it flared under my skin. The key was gone, the book destroyed, yet its rhythm had slipped into me, stitched into my veins, tethering me to the pact my ancestors had made centuries ago. I tried to leave. God, I tried. I ran down the staircase across the hall, threw open the front doors, and found myself standing not on the gravel path but back in the library. The smell of mildew and dust thick in my nose, the false bookshelf ajar as though mocking me. I sprinted to another door, yanked it open, the cellar, the chains, the marks glowing faintly. I slammed it shut, heart racing, only to find myself back at the foot of the stairs again. The house was no longer bound by geometry. It twisted, folded, reshaped itself with every step I took, ensuring I remained trapped within. A labyrinth with no exit, because I was the exit now, the vessel it had been waiting for. Days blurred into nights, nights into days, or perhaps there were no days at all. I wandered rooms that seemed endless, some filled with dust and silence, others alive with shadows that whispered promises I refused to hear. My hunger gnawed at me, thirst burned my throat, yet I did not weaken. The glow in my veins sustained me, fed me, just as it fed the house. One night, or perhaps one eternity later, I heard footsteps. Not echoes of mine, not illusions of the whispers, but true footsteps, steady, deliberate, climbing the staircase. My heart froze. Someone else was here? I crept toward the sound, every nerve alight with fear and anticipation, until I saw her, a woman no older than 30, her face pale, her clothes modern, her eyes wide with dread and determination. She clutched a lantern in one hand, a notebook in the other, muttering to herself, "The Ward mansion, the stories were true," my breath caught in my throat. She was like me once, curious, reckless, searching for answers in a place that only devoured. I wanted to scream at her to run, to leave, to fight the pull of the key that would surely find her too. But when I opened my mouth, the words twisted, warped. What left my lips was not warning but welcome. "Come closer," her lantern swung as she froze, eyes darting into the shadows where I stood. "Who's there?" she demanded, though her voice shook. I tried again to warn her, to tell her to escape, but again, the words betrayed me, my voice echoing unnaturally, layered with whispers not my own. "You've come so far? Don't be afraid." Her feet moved before her mind decided, carrying her toward me, step by step, until the glow from my veins illuminated her face. Her breath hitched, her notebook slipping from her hands as she saw me, saw what I had become. No, she whispered, backing away, shaking her head. You're not human. Tears burned my eyes as I reached out a hand, begging without words, pleading silently for her to understand, but the mansion itself surged with laughter, the portraits grinning, the walls trembling, and the whispers rose again, louder, crueler. She is yours now, they hissed. Take her. Feed. The glow in my veins flared, heat searing through me, hunger I didn't recognize twisting in my stomach. I fought it, clenching my fists, screaming against the pull, but my body stepped forward, my hand reaching, my voice calling softly, "Don't run." She ran. Her footsteps pounded through the halls, but the house twisted around her, doors vanishing, corridors stretching. She was prey in a maze that had only one predator, me. I stumbled after her, not by choice but by command, every instinct inside me clawing for escape even as the mansion drove me forward. She darted into the library, overturning shelves, her lantern casting wild shadows, and for a moment, she turned on me, holding the broken glass of the lantern like a weapon. Stay back, she screamed, tears streaming down her cheeks. I stopped, trembling, the glow beneath my skin flickering wildly. My mouth opened, and for the first time since the pact sank into me, the words were mine, weak, cracked, desperate. Run, please. Her eyes widened, she understood, if only for an instant, and she bolted past me, down the corridor, toward the grand doors. For a heartbeat, I thought she might succeed, that she might shatter the cycle, break free where I could not. But the mansion does not release its prey. The doors slammed shut before her, the walls bending, twisting, the floor splitting open beneath her feet. She screamed as the void swallowed her, the lantern shattering, the light dying. And then she was gone. Silence fell once more. Silence, and the terrible glow of my veins, stronger now, brighter, pulsing with fresh strength. The house had fed, through me. I fell to my knees, sobbing, clawing at my skin as though I could rip the glow out, tear the pact from my flesh, but it was useless. The mansion whispered again, soft and satisfied, a lullaby of hunger sated for now. You are the keeper, it crooned. You are ours. I pressed my forehead to the cold floor, shaking, the truth finally settling in my bones. There would be no escape for me, no salvation, no dawn beyond these walls. I was bound, as my father had been, as his father before him, as all of them were. The key had chosen, the pact was sealed, and the cycle would continue until time itself rotted away. And somewhere, beyond these walls, the world still whispered of the Ward mansion, of its mysteries, its disappearances, its secrets waiting to be uncovered. And someday, someone else would come, drawn by curiosity, by hunger for truth, by the pull none of us could resist. And when they did, I would be waiting.